All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about, I won't say a favorite subject, but one that comes up pretty often. And that is the decision that businesses have to make whether or not they want to build their customer experience team in-house or if they want to outsource it. And the first thing I want to touch on is that outsourcing does not mean offshoring.
Mhm.
Outsourcing can be you have a relationship with, I'm in California, it could be a business in Florida or in Georgia, and they take phone calls or they handle emails or messages for us. Still outsourcing, but onshore. There's also such thing as nearshore. For us, that's like call centers or contact centers in the Mexico area. There's some people who live in San Diego and then they cross over to go to work in Mexico and then come back home. So that relationship exists. And then there is also, of course, offshoring, where your contacts will go to, another country that's a little bit further out, be it a Latin American country or what most people know to be synonymous with outsourcing is the Philippines. So today we're going to talk about what does it mean to outsource? When is it time to outsource? And like some of the criteria that people can use to make those decisions, as well as how does it feel to be outsourced, right? Because that is also a real thing. So my name is Ty, and I'm founder and CEO of CX Collective. And I've been in CX since I was 18 years old. And I have worked from Fortune 500 to startup. And now I work with this team, which we're missing one. Chloe's on vacation, but I work with this team. And what we do is we go into companies and we build and scale CX for them. So we're the weirdos who do that work. That's a little bit about me. I will go to Jordan next as a surprise because I normally go to Sachin to do his intro, and then we'll go around.
Hey, y'all. I'm Jordan. I'm CX Operations Manager here at the Collective. I've been in the CX space for over 6 years now, helping build and scale fast-growing support teams at typically early-stage startups. So excited to talk to you about this today. I've been in the position where I've had my team outsourced, so yeah, a lot to dive into.
I'm Sachin. I am a customer experience strategist for the Collective. Been working with this awesome team for a little over a year, and I've been in the CX world for over 20 years in all different types of positions, from agent to managing and creating systems for CX as well. So I'm excited to talk about this subject. It's a very, like you said, it's a huge kind of buzz conversation that you have with clients. So excited to get started.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. And the first question we're going to start with is one that we actually get from our clients who are sometimes startups in stealth mode, or they're just going through a lot of change and they're going, should we keep customer service here? And by here, I mean within the company, within, the building. I mean, we're in a virtual world now, so it's a little different. So let's start with that conversation. How do you know when it's time to outsource your customer service team?
I think that it just depends on what's going on with your team currently. I know I've spoken to some business owners that are in a space of change. They want to do something new with their team and they're thinking, it could be a cost issue too. That's always something that comes up where it's like, well, how much more cost effective is it for me to outsource this versus keeping it in-house? Because maybe they're paying a couple full-time people. And so it just depends on the situation, I would think. Also, a lot of outsourcing comes when there's high season. I noticed that they've got a couple agents on board and then they're hitting their high season and they're looking to kind of get a temporary staff in place so they're able to deal with the uptick in inquiries. And so that's also a conversation that I hear with business owners too.
Gotcha. Jordan, when do you think it's time?
For me, I've seen it depends on the complexity of tickets. So typically high complexity tickets, it's easier to be in-house because you can build they can build relationships with the product team, engineering team, and learn the product if it's a little more complicated. So I think but if you get to a stage where you've got a bunch of tickets coming in, like a bunch of pretty easy tickets and then more complex tickets, that's when you can think about outsourcing a part of the team and having a tiered system. And I think that's usually the entryway into a lot of outsourcing that I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. I think that companies want to differentiate themselves by creating that experience where you're always speaking to a person. That is like, that's a thing right now because we have all of these systems. So it's this weird hybrid of let's use, AI chatbots as much as possible, but at the same time, let's give them a very human experience. So it really depends on, as Jordan said, what is the product, what is the service that they're offering, and how complicated is it? For some of our clients, I had advised them to use outsourcing for the work that needs to get done that is logic-based. If you just want to have that person, personal touch, someone to actually either pick up a phone or reply to a message, a real person, and you want to outsource it, consider doing that with something that's logic-based. And the reason why I say that is because, and I haven't figured out how to do this, but I feel like the best way to get the best experience is given by those people who have had that experience. When I was in college, I worked at Express, the clothing store. And my shift was 12 p.m. to 9 p.m., which was torturous for me, but it was 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. And part of that time was for me to stand in front of the store and literally greet customers. And I hated it. But at the time, I was making $6.50 an hour. And a pair of Express jeans cost $48.50. And I couldn't afford to buy the jeans at the place that I was working. So I wasn't their target customer. And I didn't understand why it was so important to say hello. Now, when I go into the store, if no one says hello, I leave. Right? So I'm saying that to say when you're outsourcing, sometimes one of the downsides of it is the person or the people who are actually handling that interaction, they don't have any connection to the product or service because they're not the user. And I would venture to say that in some businesses that works to their benefit, i.e. subscription services, right? So when you're in that space where you have someone who says, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to buy this anymore, or I don't want you to charge me any longer, the other person on the other end, they have no emotional or empathetic connection to it. And they're able to be like, no. And they can go through their rebuttals with no problem because there's no connection. So that's one of the benefits that I can think of. I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm just saying that is a fact that could be beneficial. What can you guys think of that are other benefits of outsourcing customer service?
Like you said, going back to where you're saying the product or service, if you have a very simple product or service that you're offering and it's, you've established yourself as a corporation or company and you know your numbers and know your systems really well, and it's not complex, I think outsourcing works really well because you can scale up and scale down as needed. And like you said, you can build out the relationship with like the agency, you can train, but it's, when you're not dealing with complex products and services, it does make it a lot easier to outsource that part instead of keeping it in-house. Yeah. I still think there's a benefit to having it one in-house or one person kind of the liaison of the kind of the relationship instead of just kind of handing over this part of your business and saying, okay, you guys have all the customer service issues and we're just going to go about our business, because that's where things can drop. But I think one of the big benefits is when you just have it all kind of established and you're like, let's just move this in this direction at this point,
Agreed.
I think also a benefit is like the hours of operation. It's easier to get to a 24/7 model if that's like what your business needs. My first job out of school, I was working a 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift doing customer support, and like that was not fun. And so trying to hire that in-house, I think, can be difficult sometimes. But if you're working with a BPO that can kind of manage those hours, it's a huge benefit to not have your team work super late.
I've seen companies supplement their evening hours or less desirable schedules, sometimes even weekends, with offshore team members. But I've also been in a space where I worked with a company. I was actually an employee there, and we had an offshore team. And I remember calling one of the team members via Slack because I hadn't heard from him. And somehow he answered, but was snoring, right? Full on snoring. So my question then is, what are some of the risks, right? Because that's one. Obviously, that's a key risk. What are some of the risks that you could end up running into when you're working with an outsourcer?
One of the things I've noticed is it's hard for quality assurance. Like you just said, going back to the person that was snoring. I had a project I was working on, and their CS person literally had actually two projects. There was background noise, and it's like it's hard to QA that, because especially if you have like a luxury product or service where people are expecting this like white glove conversation over the phone, being serviced and things, and then like you're hearing either like music in the background, like they're at a club, or there's animal noises in the back. It's hard to know that, right, and keep up with that, like especially if you don't have a QA, like a quality assurance. You're listening to calls, and a lot of systems aren't always equipped or has that established. That part is established. They just kind of hire customer service, let them go, and then don't take any consideration of checking those phone calls. When you do that, you can find those things out. But when you don't do that, you run the risk of a call coming through and there is some background that's inappropriate for that call.
Yeah.
And then you have now an impression from your customer, your user, that you're unprofessional, or who's the person that's answering the phone. This is not what I expected, especially if it's a new, so this is a first time client or somebody that's calling in and needing help. Picking up the phone and speaking to somebody that sounds like they're at a club is a problem. So, I've run into that.
Yeah.
Another thing that like I didn't think of until it happened was like, depending on the country or wherever it is, like there can be earthquakes, there can be political instability. And so like been in a situation where just like the whole support team had to shut down because of an earthquake and nobody could go to the office. And so obviously that can happen onshore too. Like if you have a remote team, it's like different, like it's like a failure point and something you need to take into consideration.
That's a really good point, because you brought me back to a scenario. I was in a situation like that as well, where there was I want to say a tsunami warning or something, where everyone had to kind of like hunker down in place, and that left the company pretty vulnerable. So I think along those lines, contingency plans are really important. I tend to be a worst case scenario thinker, and that's the one time that works in my benefit. Other things that, just hearing both of your answers, that I'm thinking about are from the quality perspective, making sure that you have your own quality process internally. So that aligns with Sashin's suggestion, which I 100% support, having someone in-house who is a SME on your product, your service, your brand, and is responsible for liaising with your outsourced partner to make sure that they are able to communicate and convey your brand, that they have proper training, and that they have proper expectations set. Along those lines too, though, I worked for a company. I'm trying to make sure I don't make any mention to determine which company this was, but worked for a company. They had a longstanding relationship with a BPO, so business process optimizer, onshore. And every week they would send over 2 contacts that were quality assured. And every time, of course, they were scored at 100%. And the life of a head of CX, I was very busy. Very, very busy. And it sometimes I didn't get a chance to listen to the call. And I would end up cramming to listen to the calls before our touch base, because that's another thing that's important, is to have the touch base. Okay, so finally I sit down and listen to the call, or a few calls in this particular instance, this one call. And the person, says, "Thank you for calling, XYZ company. How can I help you today?" And the customer hangs up. And that call was scored 100%. And I was like, so I reached back out and I'm like, this isn't even a real call. So I always encourage people to have their own quality process, to have access to those systems, to read those emails, listen to those calls, because it's to the benefit of the BPO to tell you that all is well. Another thing is to know your own numbers. Go into any relationship knowing and understanding what the head count is for this, or what it will be, because it's to their benefit to tell you that you need 25 people when you probably really need 15 people, right? Now, there are other factors like 24/7 operations and things like that that will increase your headcount. But, I'm just giving some advice on what I think is really important to kind of like to go into that and and get ahead of it. Also, I recommend having your own training. Go in with the training program. Don't let them build your training program, because if you decide to sever that relationship, they have all of your information, right? So those are some of the things that I am advising as far as like when you're building that relationship. But then I have another question. And that question is, how do you manage the transition to outsource customer service? And I think that some of those ideas that I gave kind of lead into that. But I'm going to touch on the way that you handle the conversation. Let's say you have an existing team and their roles are being eliminated. How have you guys handled that? I think, Jordan, you might have some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it's tough. I've been in a situation where I had to let my whole team go, or my whole team let go. And I was on like a plan of like staying 60 days to train a new team. And it was like in the height of the pandemic too. So it was like, it's one of those things where like everybody understood why it was happening. Like business was not going well, but it's so tough on a personal level. Like I do have the time, make the transition, help like the people on your team find other opportunities, and go from there. But it's tough. I think like it's such a touchy like political subject to outsourcing, and so I think like being as human as possible, explaining the business reason, and yeah, I mean, ideally, like in an ideal world, you're bringing on a BPO to handle like the high volume, low complexity tickets, and you can still maintain your team, and like they get in focus on like the higher tier, more complex work. So that's like an ideal state, but it's not an easy thing to do this transition.
No, I went through a scenario where I joined a company, and I think I started in November, October, November. And by March, there were whispers of an acquisition. And when I asked about it, it was, we can neither confirm nor deny. Okay. Then eventually, maybe 3 or 4 months later, it was official. This is happening. And, we're closing down operations here. So what was hard for me is the empathetic side, because the team that I had was so dedicated to this company. The dedication was like unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I knew that there were going to be tears. So I tried to figure out ways to, one, give them new skills that they could use to get, better opportunities, honestly, when they left. So maybe we can't pay you more, but let me teach you how to QA calls. So then that way you can go somewhere and maybe join the QA team. Or I shouldn't say just me, because it was a team effort. It wasn't me. Like, let us teach you, right? Training, let us teach you how to document policies and processes. Let us teach you how to put together a training program. So then you can take that and maybe go somewhere and become a trainer. Let me teach you how to do staff planning so that maybe you can do workforce management somewhere. And it's always nice to see that for some of them, that those skills really did make a difference. I stayed until the end to make sure that I handed out every severance payment to every person. And after I did that, then I was like, okay, and I'll take my payment now too. Thank you. Because I was ready to go. But during that time, we had to transition. There was a team, and they're lovely people. I'm actually still in touch with a lot of them. And we had to transition. And so we did the training remotely. No one flew out of the country, but we did the training remotely. We transitioned operations. In fact, the company did allow people to stay on for about 3 months after we knew what was happening. So there was like literally nothing to do. So we would just have parties and order lots of good food and just try to find some way to feel good about it. But I think the human aspect is one that I'm not saying it's not considered, And I understand financial decisions. If you want the company to survive, sometimes you have to make those tough choices. But I think really thinking about how the people who you've entrusted to really deliver for your customers, how do they feel?
Yeah,
Right?
I agree with that. There's a part of, I know my work history that I feel like you're part of a collateral damage in a way that
Yeah.
is not your fault. And
Yeah.
if you are somebody that has a lot of integrity in your work and your role in a team environment, and it's hard because I know there's companies that want to have kind of that family environment, and we're a big family, but how do you keep the family vibe if you're now cutting up, cutting your, teams off here left and right because of the whole, if we're going to stay in business, we have to make some difficult decisions.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's almost kind of be careful in a
Yeah.
lot of ways of how you internally are cultivating your business culture, especially when it comes down to teams that you can do this type of transition from an internal space to an outsourced space, because there are people's livelihoods at stake, and I know as a business owner, it's really not easy. It's never easy, but being careful about that and trying to stay human in that, I think makes it easier for everybody, and being as transparent as possible. I mean, neither confirm or deny, not a great feeling because nobody knows. And if there's rumblings, it's almost kind of like somebody's leaking, somebody's spilling tea. So you might as well just go ahead on and say what's going to happen so people can make plans, and really have integrity in the space of them having to leave the company and then bringing on this new group as well.
That's a good point. Jordan, in your situation, were they transparent with you, or did you hear rumblings before the shoe dropped?
I was actually on vacation, and I was like, had no internet, and I came back from vacation to like a missed text from my boss being like, "Hey, can we talk?"
Oh my goodness.
It was like, I think the company was like about to run out of money, and they were able to secure this acquisition funding, and then it all just like.
And that was that.
I mean, I've been in positions where I stayed in a company and they couldn't pay me.
Oh,
and
wow.
I stayed, like, hoping and like, waiting for that funding to come in because it was a startup. And, I had a kind of a customer service role, a client facing role. So we were still operational without getting paid until the last of them, last of the last, and had to walk out of there with like equipment as payment.
Wow.
Because that's how bad it got. But then it was almost a reflection of how hardcore I am as an employee. You know what I mean? And having to be careful in that space, because you can damage yourself trying to stay loyal to a situation where there's really no guarantees.
And then this is not on topic at all, but it's a natural progression, right? Because I feel similar to you in that my dedication to a company or to the people has often been to my detriment, right? The stuff that you kind of take on that nobody else sees, that you just deal with every day because you're trying to just keep things going, right? I remember we had a client, this was early on, like 2017, 2018 maybe, and great client, like love them, still use their stuff, like have on some of it right now. And they wanted to bring me on as a part-time, like VP for CX. And I really appreciated that. And I turned it down. But I turned it down because I know that my level of dedication would not allow me to be part-time there. Right. And then what would, at the time, the Workforce Pro, what would that have become had I gone there? And then also in my history, knowing how things can go with CX. What happens if I go there and then they decide, actually, no, thanks? What do I do then? So I'm going to ask a question that's not on our list of questions to discuss today, but like, because outsourcing is a reality for CX people, how do you balance dedication with self-preservation?
That's a good question. Some people are really more ruthless about that, and I'm not mad about ruthless, because in this day and age of working, I think it's a lot going on, right? Yeah. But in my history of when I look back, my dedication has pretty much superseded self-perseverance, because I was like loyal to a fault. You know what I mean? whatever role I was working in, I take very seriously. And so I was always, over and beyond, taking extra shifts, doing the most, you know what I mean? Always just big team player. And then, other parts of my life would take a hit because of that. There was not a lot of balance with it because I was always, sacrificing self-preservation, right? Taking on extra work. And of course, it makes you look kind of shine if you have a good work environment. But that really, then there's a dependency that's built up. Because if so-and-so drops the ball over here, then they know Sashin's going to come through and pick it back up or cover or do whatever. It does bring a lot of pressure on you. And at the time, I didn't realize that. I was just doing my job or what I thought was my job at the time. But, if you hear rumblings of a layoff, it was like, well, I wasn't thinking about applying to someplace else. I was hoping for the best, being optimistic, not realistic, right?
Yeah.
Because I enjoyed my environment. So, the work environment so much or the team so much. And if somebody was like, oh, well, we really don't know yet, but it's not going to be too bad. Right. Oh, we think that, because you never know until you know. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that in my experience, I know that the balance of dedication was way, way beyond the self-preservation. I never got out in time.
But how does that impact you today? Like, what decisions have you made in your career as a result of that reality, like learning that about yourself? Now, what do you do differently today that has your oxygen mask on first?
For me, it's now, I've learned a lot more about boundaries and work boundaries and who is a client that makes sense for me to work with or an environment for me to work with, and knowing and asking more questions and not making a lot of assumptions. I think that a lot of times I came in and I just made assumptions, or I was just kind of listening and going along to get along. And now I don't really do that. I ask questions. I really get all the information I need so I can make an informed decision, and making sure that it's a good project, or it's a good team I'm walking in and working with. And, making sure that I'm, if something comes up, I ask. I'm just more bold about what is going on versus, if I heard, like today, if you put me back there, I would have walked into the boss's office and been like, so what's the deal? I'm hearing rumblings. Right. And wouldn't have cared about my position at the time, because they always say, well, I have an open door policy. Well, the door is open. What is going on? Right. And what does that mean? Right. So I just think I'm a little bit more in a space of confidence than I was 20 years ago when I was working in those environments, because of all the things that you go through it, and just creating a better protocol for yourself,
Jordan, you have an opinion on that one?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think I'm still trying to find that balance. I think like dedication usually ends up paying off, but I think I've learned, like you said, Sashin, to ask questions. Like if a company, when I'm interviewing, is like, we're like a family, like that's a red flag to me. I'm like, no, I'm not here for that. I'm going to have fun.
It's like I have a family, right?
So just like going in with the mindset of like, in this industry, anything like it's happened to me several times in my career where like outsourcing has like caused me to have to change or pivot. And so going in, like knowing that that's a possibility, I think that perspective helps. But yeah, my like drive to like be dedicated when I join a place, like it's definitely something I do struggle with.
The way that I deal with it is I've developed this ability to, I don't know if this is good. So if there's a therapist who ever looks at this, they might be like, that girl's got issues. But to detach and emotionally, right? And look at this as a means to an end. But also would enable me. This is like towards the end of my my career as like a direct employee, obviously before starting this, the ability to detach, to not have any fear, which can be not scary for me, scary for them, because I'm not attached. And if this doesn't work, I just move on, embracing the unknown, and then using every opportunity that I have to continue to build my skill set, right? To make me more marketable. But at the same time, the company would benefit from that as well, because my skill set's getting better, right? And if they have a more marketable leader, that's better for them. So it was kind of like a two-way street. And I had to learn that because I had been in many rooms where you hear the company talk about being a family. And I remember one place they used to use the word maniacal. And to this day, it makes my arm hair stands up. I can't stand it. But these different words that are rooted in put yourself second, put us first. And then when they're done, they're done. So family for me, I know my family doesn't work here. Well, that's not true. My cousin did used to work for CXC, but my cousin doesn't work here. My mom doesn't work here. But leading with transparency, because one thing that I've always said to you guys as members of the collective, like if things get weird, you're gonna know. I'm gonna tell you as soon as they get weird, so that you can self-preserve. I'll never put you in a situation where you're working up until the very last minute and then be like, oh, by the way, yeah, paycheck not gonna happen. Like, who would do that, right? Although, I mean, Tashina has been in that situation, and I got served, not personally, but for a company I was with, an eviction notice. And the articles that were coming out were like, are they gonna make payroll? What? I have a mortgage. Please make payroll. So I know that was a tangent, but I felt like it was fitting, because I think that what people who might be in this situation of having their job eliminated, or leaders who are going through having to take their team through a transition, what does that feel like? And then what do you do, and how do you recover? So I think that this was a pivotal point in this conversation, so that we could share, like, here's how you can recover, and here's how you can be okay afterwards.
Right.
Because even though that job's gone, there's always going to be something else.
I got one more point, because I would like to, I know this may not be on topic, but it's kind of on topic, because if we're talking about outsourcing in this age of AI that we are entering in, and a lot of the rumblings of, is positions going to, companies going to be entirely replaced by these automated systems? And it's, especially when companies are very heavily like, because I feel like there's a genius of automation that makes work easier, and then there is a fault of automation that makes customer experience very difficult.
Yeah.
And so there's a balance to it, and that's just my opinion. I think it's a very balance to it, but you still have to have a human element to it, because it's just kind of what it is. But as we go along with these very intelligent systems, and the threat of something like customer service being at the forefront of being like jobs being eliminated, because now they have AI coming. What do you guys think about that? Like, is that something that you see being now not only a BPO, but now as an AI tech, opportunity going to come in and take replace the customer service department in a product or service?
I have thoughts, but I'll let you go first, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm like pretty optimistic about it not replacing jobs, but like making it easier for CX teams to do their jobs. I think like at every startup and company I've worked for, there's no way an AI would be able to deal with the complicated back-end systems and like do all the weird operational things that we have to do as humans. Like if somebody can solve that, then yes, AI will take over our jobs. But like an AI can like answer help center questions or like things like when you feed it text. But I think having to do some of the like sometimes annoying stuff and like the relationship building too, like, so maybe that'll change. But I think so many organizations want to like build relationships with their customers, and you're not going to do that with a bot. Even like Lemonade has like Maya, their bot that like I love, and like I talk about Maya and like she's great. But I like when I have to talk to Lemonade support team, like they're also great, and like that's what I love too.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely excited about like the potential, but don't think it's going to take our jobs yet.
You know what it reminds me of? The push and pull that we went through. I'm going to say somewhere between 2007 and maybe 2012, 13, where outsourcing was a big deal. So at the time, you know what I mean? So I feel like AI, it's the same thing where it's a new thing. Now, do I think that marketers should be afraid? Yes. Because for someone like myself, who I'm not the best person to deliver a marketing message, because I'm not going to give you anything it's not going to be fluffy enough, to be honest. It's just going to be like, you should do this, very black and white, right? Whereas you can use AI to like soften that message, to change the tone, to to do all these things. So I think marketers who write copy, they should be a little fearful. Though I will say that for any individual, you are your own product. You are the difference. So maybe what you do is way different or better. Maybe I'm impressed by AI because that's not my gift, right? But I think what we'll see is that you'll see that push and pull where inevitably it'll be, oh, move everything to AI. And then the customer will become frustrated. Okay, now bring it back. Oh, it's too expensive. And then they'll land somewhere right in the middle. Kind of what we're seeing right now with outsourcing. I know I worked for a company years ago, and they had many different products. And one of the selling points for one of the products we serviced onshore, matter of fact, in California, so very expensive, was that you had to be a subscriber to a certain product. If you had this product, then you had your support onshore. If you didn't have this product, your support went offshore. And that lasted for a bit of time until they started to lose customers, and then they brought it back. Because I think it goes back to the point that we're talking about where it depends on what the product is. And if it's a very great area and how you support or service it, if it's, very customized, if it's very much so about the individual or the company and how you use it, you are going to have some trouble sending it so far away to a team of people who may not have touched that product. Now, if they've touched it and they use it, you're going to probably end up with a different experience. Like Papa John's pizza, I fell in love with the Parmesan crust. I know it's bad. It's good. It tastes so good, and it's very inexpensive. I should not be plugging them, but I don't have a following, so it doesn't matter. So, but the pizza's good. And when you call and order it, they will, I know that I'm talking to someone overseas. However, it's so simple. Someone's going to pick up the phone right away. I'm ordering a pizza. They know who I am because they have a good CRM. I go to the store and pick it up. It's ready. No problem. Well, there's one problem. Very rarely do they actually give me square cut. But that's beside the point. I like.
No, you're right. The square cut. It is impossible to get the square cut. And even if you put it, if you're online and you're like, I want this square cut, it never happens.
They don't listen. And that bothers me because, like square cut makes me feel like I'm eating a little bit less, to be honest with you.
I'm from Chicago, and there's like the thin crust pizzas there's a square cut kind of, the pizza joints I grew up on.
Okay.
That's just kind of how it was. So it was something that's very familiar to me on how to eat pizza. It's sacrilegious in some places in the United States. They'd be like, what do you mean square cut? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I understand. I definitely understand.
Yeah. So I think that's a good use case. Let's talk about some other use cases. I know we talked like high level about good use cases for offshoring. What are some other good use cases?
I like some of the big conglomerates that have their chat bot that you're pretty much dealing with somebody offshore, but the fact that you can talk to somebody and walk through, like I was on a flight and I had a problem getting internet together, and do not call any airline because God forbid you're never going to get any human on the phone. I mean, you're going to be on the phone for 2 hours waiting or whatever.
Wait, I'm only going to pause you right here because you and I were supposed to talk about Southwest. When that whole thing happened.
Oh, that's right.
The airlines need CX Collective. I'm just going to say it.
Oh, you're right.
Okay,
you're right. I'm scared to drop this article because I need to drop this article about my American Airlines situation with the gas and the fact that they messed up and didn't have enough gas to get down the runway. Literally, and we had to go back, and we were late for like 2 hours. That was a whole article I wrote on the plane because I was outraged. So I need to drop that on LinkedIn and just not be afraid. So I need to do it, and that will be a good lead in to the Southwest thing. Okay,
yes,
I'll do it. It's already written. I got to find it. I was on a flight, and I was trying to get my situation together for my internet because I wanted to do a little bit of work. And I was like, of course, it's like I'm about to take off, so there's no way. So I ended up chatting this person through like what's going on. And you could tell, typically those are places where they have a BPO in place. And it was super good because I was able to get everything handled like right then and there as we were like taxiing, and was able to have a pleasant flight as a result. So when you
Nice.
have those systems in place where, especially like with the chat, like those live chats, that's a hard thing to supply for 24/7. So you
Yeah.
definitely need to consider that outsourcing, because I think that's an expectation that you
Yeah.
have to have a human being. Like it's just that simple. So no, but that was a really good, it was a good example of how something could be solved quickly. They had the back end, they were able to do all the techie stuff, and I was able to get everything handled with ease.
That's good.
Hmm.
That's
So that
good.
was my
I
experience
think
on it.
the one thing to also consider for companies is that they put a lot of faith in these CRMs, but the CRM is only as good as the person who configured it. Fortunately, we've got the wonderful Jordan who helps us out, and he's really good, you know. But I think that that's one of the things that people need to understand is that like the bot is only as good as what you tell the bot. The bot is not its own independent, intelligent person. A person is a person, but a bot is a bot, and the bot is only going to be as good as your help center articles. So if you spend time there. Jordan, you have
Also,
any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
one more thing about the bot. Bots have to be trained. And
Right.
in a lot of CRMs, there's there, depending on the back end of which one you're talking about, that bot training is essential. And a lot of times people or businesses don't have a person on point to train it properly. And
Right.
that's where it goes to the wayside. So that's
Right.
another point I just wanted to make.
Very, very clear and true. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I think something maybe we touched on a little bit earlier, but I want to expand on a bit is like I think in terms of a good use case for offshoring, if you're like a small team and you don't want to deal with like hiring a whole team and like managing a whole team, like if you're like a young CEO and like CX just isn't your thing, like you could hire somebody to
Yeah.
like do all that, but that's also complicated and like
Yeah.
that just might not be your forte. And like if you've got a simple enough product that you can just outsource that all to like somebody else and make it somebody else's problem,
Yeah.
I think that's a good reason to do it.
Yeah. And truthfully, and I said this before in one of our chats, but CX changes the culture of the company. Hiring in-house changes the culture of the company. And it's just because there is an expectation that CX is available when the customer needs the CX team to be available, which means they don't have as much flexibility and fluidity in when they start, when they take break, when they take lunch, things like that. And because they don't have that flexibility for the people who are doing the job every day, they feel like they're almost in school. And so sometimes it's not a bad idea to like have that work done in a place where they won't necessarily have that feeling per se, because or if even if you go with an agency and that agency, whether they have W2 or contractors that support your company, it's up to them to provide a certain company culture, right? And so if they are working remotely, they have that flexibility. If they are, even if they're in a specific location, that entire location, they all have the same rules as far as availability, flexibility, things like that. Because unfortunately, CX leaders get put into the most impossible situations trying to uphold SLAs, service level agreements, since I'm using jargon, but making sure that emails are answered in a certain amount or phone calls are answered in 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever that is, trying to balance that with the fact that the marketing team is, doing whatever they're doing, and they can come in anywhere between 8 and 10, and they can work at home when they need to. So thinking about the company culture really, really, really does matter. Any stories of outsourcing gone wrong? I can't think.
Absolutely. Oh
Oh, you
no.
got one. Okay, tell us.
Outsourcing gone wrong. Rogue agents. Rogue agents. And rogue agents are a general concept, like that's a general thing because of lack of training, whatever the reasons are. But when you have rogue agents offshore or outsourced, it is amazing what is
Yeah.
going on. Just the freestyling of it all, because they may have certain tools that, but if something is out of their scope of understanding of the service or product,
Mm-hmm.
very fascinating to see what the outcome is and what customers then say back,
Yeah.
and this was a time where that particular client did not have any, like, they didn't have a lot of structure in place, or they had structure, grew, lost structure, it was all chaos. Now they've got like skeleton crew, people answering the tickets they can that day, and that's it. So they were
Yeah.
already in space of backlog, but they had a couple agents that were Outsource just really coming up with the most amazing things that were not true. And it was like having to walk into that chaotic environment and go, okay, how do we get these people in line of, first of all, this is absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
Helping the business owner know where just where the state of the situation is, and then figure out, how do we go from here? How do we recover? How do we get customers back in space of trust?
Yeah.
Because that's really, it was an amazing situation to walk into, because I was like, wow, nobody said anything, and they were just letting these agents do whatever they wanted.
You know what that sometimes it comes down to is not wanting to disappoint the company that hired them. And this is just what I've seen, is that they won't escalate. They won't ask questions. They'll just try to wing it and figure it out, so that they don't look like they don't know or understand or aren't doing the best to service the customer. And I wish that there was more. So that's a bit of imposter syndrome too, but I wish that there was more confidence in understanding that we all make mistakes. We all have questions. It's okay. And there's a lot of weight in making these rogue decisions when you're dealing with someone's customer, because that customer could be vocal, and then now you have a problem with your branding. But yeah, that's a very good point. A very, very good point. Anything to add, Jordan?
I think maybe on like the flips, like kind of an opposite problem, but still a problem, is like outsourcing and having them just stick to the books and like making no exceptions. Last week we were talking about like policies and like when you should make exceptions. And I think sometimes it's easier for inshore folks, especially if you're all in the same office with the other teams, to like make those exceptions, because you've just built, like, you know a little bit more, you're a little bit closer to the product. Whereas like sometimes an outsourced team can just say no to the customer and just like,
and that's that. Yeah, I have an issue. You guys know I've been fighting with my refrigerator I haven't even had it a year. I think I've had 6 repair people here. It's still acting up. My last interaction was with the actual brand. And in talking to them, they said, oh, you just need to unplug it and plug it back in. Did that, still giving me the same issue. And I'm frustrated. The person that I spoke to was definitely reading a script. And I could tell, this is what you need to do. I'm like, I've done that. This is what you need to do. I've done that. Well, this says that you have to do it, and then you have to call back. Oh my gosh. Please let me talk to someone else. Let me talk to someone who understands. That's what it comes down to. Someone who understands. So whether that person is here, there, they need to understand. And I don't know how to teach understanding yet, as far as like a product or a service. If you've never been a user of said product or service, how do you make people understand? I don't know.
And then in your case, at this point, if there's no protocol to say, when do we send out a replacement? We understand this is a large ticket item, right? Understood. But that's not your problem, right? Yeah. You've literally had 6 service people within, I want to say, a year.
Yeah, that have come not out. Even a year. Mm-hmm.
That is definitely escalation for a replacement product. And what you have something that is clearly defective. And that in the fact that there's no accountability around that, or it's lost in the sauce and there's nobody to give that kind of like clarity to say, okay, this is the time to say, we're going to take it back and give you a new one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that would totally make you happy. You'd be like, great,
I just want a functioning refrigerator, because the last one I had didn't work. So I switched brands. I previously had some Samsung, now I have LG, thinking like, maybe if I get a different brand, it'll work. Same boat, same bad service. Well, here's what I think. Outsourcing could be used to improve your customer experience. I'm going to lean more on the SLA side. And when I say that, it's more so about getting someone to quickly address and answer questions for you that are already determined. I think that outsourcing might be problematic if there's a heavy gray area, right? Unless you can somehow infuse understanding. Maybe send refrigerators so that they can experience them. I don't know, this particular refrigerator and the one that is, overdoing the ice thing. Like, experience that and see the frustration that you feel as the consumer when you spend your hard-earned money on something like that and it doesn't work the way you expect it to. I don't know how to convey that to someone who may not be a consumer of that product. But I do think that there are obviously pros and cons, and I think that the decision to outsource really heavily leans on what is your reasoning, right? And if your reasoning is all cost, there's a solution for that. If your reasoning is making sure that someone's always available, there's reasoning for that. So I don't think it's wrong. I always say it's not, there's no such thing as right or wrong. It's just what's right for you. So that's my opinion on it. Does anybody have anything they want to add? Any closing words? No? That's it. That's all. Well, I always appreciate chatting with you guys. We miss Chloe, but I think she's in Aruba where just luxuriating as she should. But we look forward to having her back next week. And yeah, if that's it, then that's it. We're gonna I'll look at our list, see what we're gonna talk about next, and we'll go from there. All right, y'all. I hope you have a good weekend.
You too.
You too.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.